Hello and welcome everybody to, according to Andrew number 67, is the Progressive Era 2.0 coming? I kind of got this idea from Vox Day's blog. He was talking about kind of how the end of American polity had ended, and basically there's no point in voting and stuff like that. And it kind of got me thinking. There was another time in history that this was kind of the case, and that was with the populist moment. And I kind of wanted to go through with my own brain and try to figure out whether or not it made any sense that politics would um, that it inevitably ends up where it seems like it's going, right? It definitely, when you read the populist moment, it seems like things are pretty bad, and it's not like it necessarily got better. Well, it did get better, but like in a twisted way. The ruling class found a way to give the peons some of the stuff that they wanted, while also being able to grow and consolidate their own power. So, in that regard, worked. Uh, it worked kind of for both sides. And I think that they could do a similar. You'd think that they would be able to do a similar thing, but it doesn't seem like they're able to do that, or they're just kind of so full of themselves that they can't. I don't know. It's really weird. Um, and so I wanted to kind of explore that. But let's read the article first. So this is called "Armed and Unprepared." I don't agree at all with the American Greatness article. The recent election demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that democracy is dead and that there is no political exit. And this is where it kind of got me thinking, because back in this time, there was basically no point in voting either. The ballot polls were, or the polls were stuffed with ballots constantly, and people were cheated out. All the populists were basically cheated out of victories over and over again by democratic systems in the South. Now the difference is, it was only in this, as far as I could tell, it was mainly in the South that this stuff was happening. So maybe because it wasn't as widespread, it wasn't as big of a problem. But I don't know. It seems like that should have ended the whole system right there. And also you had, was it Ruther? No, not Ruther B. Hayes. Anyway, in 1876, there was someone who was elected under various dubious circumstances as well, similar to the current election that happened with Biden supposedly winning under very dubious circumstances. Um, was it No, it wasn't McKinley. Anyway, so continuing on, it strikes me as yet another conservative finger wagging. This is your last chance to vote your way to safety, but the voting machines have been compromised. Ergo, no one's votes matter in the slightest. There is no more Democrat versus Republican. There's only optimate versus popular, which is from Roman times. Also the other thing that kind of stirred my way of thinking about this whole thing is because uh, Barnes is the opposite of this viewpoint. While he doesn't necessarily believe that we can vote our way out of this, he does believe that there's ways in which we can put institutions in place and re get all of the various things in place to make it so that voting securely can be reestablished, and therefore voting can proceed again and democracy can be reestablished. So he doesn't believe, basically, democracy is dead, as he said here, but he doesn't believe that it's going there's that you have to have a collapse of the current political establishment and a complete wiping of the United States and a rebuilding of something new to make that happen. Which one's right? History will tell. But it's kind of an interesting. They're two very interesting, uh, different viewpoints on the idea. Continuing with who he quoted here. Many traditional Americans are sleepwalking into a conflict that they are not mentally prepared to handle. The ideas of blind justice and due process are now, for all intents and purposes, quaint relics, and rely on constitutional rights of protection is dangerously naive. Like it or not, we live in a police state controlled by an increasingly authoritarian regime with near total electronic surveillance. The national security apparatus views conservatives and freethinkers as domestic terrorists, and there's now more military deployed in our nation's capital than there are war zones overseas. If America were any other country, it would be considered a non-permissive environment, not a free country. Totally agree with all this. The pundit class recommends midterm elections and unifying the GOP as remedies, but these ignore the real elephant in the room. Representative government is not representing us. While the conservatives and independent voices are censored and banned from the community square, their elected representatives cower behind the desk and make sweetheart deals with the new regime. We are facing a new post-justice, post-truth society. We won't be able to debate our way out of it, vote our way out of it, or tweet our way out of it. No one is coming to save us. If traditional America wants to be free, it will have to stop living in the past, get up off the couch, and take action. Uh, the good news, and this is now back to Vox, the good news is that there is nothing particularly difficult about the present situation. The only difference between the two parties described in the article and the two parties of the Roman history is that in the U.S., the optimists are mostly foreigners. Indeed, in this situation in which the overwhelming majority of humanity found itself for the greater part of history, the populares defeated the optimates in Rome, and it was defeated and will defeat them again in America. So that's kind of the current dynamic that's going on, and it's interesting to explore. So the idea that I wanted to kind of explore about this, and actually this is a good frame to pause this on, is uh, what kind of happened in the Gilded Age, the late 1800s, early 1900s, with the birth of the Progressive Era, and it was able to be birthed out of this current, the, basically because of what this political ad is showing. So there was a populist movement. They developed the Populist Party. That Populist Party split the base of the Democratic Party, and it destroyed the Democratic Party and allowed the Republicans to take over. The Republicans were then able to, with this basically near control of the government, kind of reinvent and reset the rules and created the progressive era that kind of reshaped and reformed a lot of the wedge issues and a lot of the things that shaped us. So before the progressive era, and morphing a little bit over the populist era, a lot of the things that drove voters were things like the Civil War and which side of the Civil War you were on, uh, and what were some of the other issues? That was the big one. Um, that they would get to drive people to the polls and stuff like that. And then there were other aspects here and there of things that they would do. Uh, but that the Civil War issue was the big one, and the Progressive Era kind of ended that and shifted it into these new things like worker rights or kind of uh, your New Deal S type issues, your better working conditions for the worker. That's the things that came out of this. But the those were kind of the things that were being asked for by the Populist Party and the Populist movement, and it was basically delayed for about 20 to 30 years through various schemes and ballot stuffing and various contrivances that completely shattered and made it so the populist movement didn't go anywhere. And then the progressive area was allowed to take over because it was something that it was going to rear its head again and become a problem again if nobody did anything. And so what they did is they basically took what they always seem to do is they take the natural good energies and they refocus and change people. It's kind of like a magic trick where it's a sleight of hand, and they make you look at something else. And they gave them certain things like better working conditions and better hours, better safety regulations, all that kind of stuff. Um, but then once they got that, they basically were. They also gave a lot of power and control over to major corporations as well. Sure, maybe you could maybe argue that the overall control and power that they had afterwards was less, but the key thing is uh, sometimes they will trade power for stability, right? So it's like, okay, well, I have to give up some power here, but it makes it so I will be in power for longer, right? They don't necessarily care about anyone beyond their own lives, but if there's a threat that's potentially going to take them out of power within their own lives, that's the time that they will give up a little bit of their own power to ensure some stability, and then they'll play a little bit more of the long game. So that's kind of what happened. So we'll go through some of the stuff I wrote here. So uh, line between when things have gone too far. Uh, where is the line when things have gone too far to turn back? Currently, the U.S. is going through a time where all the institutions have basically been discredited. This is not unlike the Gilded Age of the late 1800s and early 1900s, where similar things like voter fraud and bias courts were prevalent. What allowed them to pull out of the death spiral, and why is this unlikely to happen now? The reason they are able to turn out from the death spiral is the ruling class is able to change the wedge issues of the day. This is done by the Democratic Party effectively collapsing due to the competition of the Populist Party, which I touched on, the total control of the government, giving total control of the government to the Republicans until Woodrow Wilson, and even after him, there's another string of Republican victories. The monopoly in the government was used to start the progressive era, and the effects of which are still we are still under today. While this paid lip service to the populist movement that preceded it, the movement it is this movement was much more in control of the corporate interests. Thus, the workers got some of the reforms that they wanted, and the class got what they really wanted: the control of the situation that threatened to engulf them. So, could something like this happen again today? It seems like it could have, and Trump would have been a good vehicle to do so, which I will touch on. Uh, but the oligarchs seem to have forgotten that they need to show some semblance of caring about the concerns of Americans. And that's the big thing. It's like you see all the hysteria and stuff like that in the newspapers. And there was plenty of hysteria in the populist moment, so maybe it isn't out of place, but it certainly seems out of place, and it's to a certain level. Now, there is an idea that that is part of all kind of according to plan thing. I think a lot of that, where you're like, oh, we did all this according to plan, is an easy way to like give yourself more credit than is due, right? When someone says, oh, you had this genius thing where you did this, and like things that you just happened to do, not because you had planned it out, but it was just kind of like your instinctual thing that did, and then it worked out, and then they give you like all this precedent of being able to think 1,000 steps ahead and make all these moves. You just kind of let them credit you with that and don't don't question them. Uh, I think Hitler has a similar thing where this happened, where he just kind of made some instinctual moves that made sense to him, and then they credit him with being like this crazy genius of like being able to think like 12 steps ahead in 4D chess. Trump's a very similar figure where they're like, oh, it's 4D chess, and it's like, nah, he's just going off of instinct, right? Um, so yeah, that's kind of that tangent. Anyway, back to what we were saying. The reason Trump seems like a good vehicle for this populist and progressive era shift is that he's a big name celebrity. Since all the celebrities are ostensibly controlled by the establishment, you could use them to do some minor tweaks to the system. They give the they gave rights to some. They give some of the stuff back to the people that they wanted, but ultimately gave the establishment more control. They didn't do this, however, which seems odd. Now, Trump did seem like more of a wild cannon than most, and a little bit harder to control. But even then, a lot of times you can kind of rein them in and figure out ways to direct them in ways that you want them to go. Uh, but there's an argument that he was doing that. Anyway, uh, either again, they are so full of themselves that they can't see how petty and divorced from reality they are, which is a distinct possibility. Another is that the system uh, set up by the Federal Reserve has basically run its course and the coming collapse restricts their actions into what can be done. So basically, because we're basically out of options when it comes to monetary policy and fiscal policy and just this whole system that we created that kind of started with the Federal Reserve is kind of out of time. There's a limited amount of options they have, right? So if your options are uh, go for like if you're like let's say we're driving a car and the options are like forward, backward, and like brake, right? But like the shifter's broken and the brakes are broken, and so now our only option is to like let off the gas pedal and slowly coast to, or like slam on the gas pedal and go even faster. And it seems like their choice has been to slam on the gas pedal, which seems odd, but um, I don't know. There might be a reason for it. Uh, the final idea is that Trump was controlled opposition, uh, in that while he talked a big game and was attacked relentlessly by the media, his actual accomplishments that he promised were rather minimal, and the whole spectacle was more of a show than anything else. There's certainly some truth and validity to that. He also did get plenty accomplished, and more accomplished than most presidents, and he was also facing one of the hardest situations that a president has ever faced. So, in that regard, uh, it's kind of a little bit of column A, column B. And as a final point, as is as a last note, none of these ideas are necessarily mutually exclusive, so any and all could be in play at any given time. With regards to the progressive era, the corporations have certainly gotten more control as the entire economy, right now, as the entire economy was shut down so that the largest corporations could get a fire sale deal and consolidate more power. And so basically, there's been more economic consolidation contraction due to shutting down our economy, which was to cover the fact that we are currently going through a Great Depression 2.0 economic collapse. Unlike the progressive era, there's no amelioration of the situation for the average person. They are told to just toughen up and deal with it. This is how the people were treated on the lead up to the populist movement, and the progressive era was a reaction to that. So maybe this is the early stages of this. But America is so fractured, institutions so beyond saving seemingly, that the ruling class does not seem to have the 20 to 30 years to get their collective act together, nor do they seem to want to. The ruling elite are acting like locusts, simply picking the field dry during before jumping to the next one. But the problem is that there is no next field to jump to. And while some have become aware of that fact, I think that most of them are very unaware, and they do not have a plan that, and they are creatures of the moment. Uh, it will be a rude awakening when they find out that China, who is the plan to, that was the next one to suck off the teat of and act as locust to, uh, who is the escape plan, has decided to close its doors. There's a small chance that they realize this soon enough to change course, but the current juncture, I rather doubt this will happen. And so that's kind of where we stand. It's a weird time in history. I don't really know what's going to happen, and I'm just kind of trying to figure it out with all the rest of you. But, we'll see how this populist thing shakes out. We'll see kind of maybe what actions us individuals can take, whether that's kind of creating new institutions or groups or, founding new groups like the Bears and just trying to win back the culture through creating new culture and all that stuff. Just doing every little thing that we can do, even uh, little things like supporting unauthorized and stuff like that. Like those little bits help no matter what. So yeah, just do what you can to help in the culture war and the overall war of society. Build something, create something, generate friends, create a community. All those things um, lead to better outcomes, and overall, it's more fun. It's something to do. It's something to keep your mind off of all the craziness that's going on right now. So it's a good plan regardless of whether or not things are going to crap or not. But anyway, that kind of concludes what we got going on today. Hopefully, you guys found this interesting. Uh, Leave a comment if you have any ideas on this whole thing, and I'll be glad to read them. Whether it's on Social Galactic, where I'll be posting this, or uh, the various places that I post this, which is Podbean, BitChute, and YouTube. Uh, then subscribe and like, which I would very appreciate. And thank you guys very much for listening, and have a good day. Goodbye.